The two-week ceasefire between the United States and Iran continues to be tested this morning. Moments ago, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu posted on social media that his military will continue to strike Hezbollah with force, precision, and determination. He highlighted strikes in Beirut that killed the personal secretary of Hezbollah's leader. Lebanon, meanwhile, says nearly 200 people were killed and hundreds more wounded just yesterday in one of the deadliest days for the country since the start of the war. Following those deadly attacks, Iran claimed Lebanon was included in the ceasefire agreement and accused the United States of violating the deal, which the White House denied. Also this morning, the status of the Strait of Hormuz, the crucial waterway and key piece of this deal, remains unclear. Iranian state media yesterday claimed the strait had once again been closed in response to Israel's continued strikes on Lebanon. President Trump then issued a new warning late last night, writing on social media that all U.S. military personnel and assets will remain in the region until, quote, the real agreement reached is fully complied with, adding that if it is not, then attacks will be bigger and stronger than before. A lot of things that are unclear here.
Yeah.
Joining the conversation, we have the former host of Hardball, Chris Matthews, the president of Eurasia Group and G0 Media, Ian Bremmer, and Mike Barnicle and Katty Kay are still with us.
Ian Bremmer, the United States went to war with Benjamin Netanyahu. Marco Rubio admitted that's the reason we went to war, that Netanyahu was going, so we felt compelled to go along. It's how we started the war, and right now that's how the war continues, because Benjamin Netanyahu is never going to stop fighting. He's just not. He is committed to a forever war for a lot of reasons that we've already explained here. Talk about how this partnership with Benjamin Netanyahu is going to make Donald Trump's goal of ending this war in the 4 to 6 to 8 week time frame that he originally had planned, make it nearly impossible.
Well, it's not that Israel is continuing to strike Iran directly. With the announcement of the ceasefire, that has stopped, at least for the last 24 hours. But, of course, when it comes to Lebanon, it's not that Israel was just continuing the war as planned. It was actually the most significant set of attacks, literally in the hours after Trump announced the ceasefire, by the Israelis on Lebanon, on Hezbollah, in Beirut, and the rest.
The Iranians, I understand it wasn't against Iran, but the Iranians said that the ceasing of attacks in Lebanon was a big part of that plan that both sides agreed to, and Netanyahu decided to launch attacks.
That's right.
After that. That reports have killed up to 200 people in Lebanon overnight.
That's right. And again, this is an escalation by the Israelis in their war on their front. And the Pakistani prime minister, who was essential to bringing the Americans and the Iranians together to a ceasefire, had initially announced that Hezbollah and Lebanon was indeed part of the ceasefire, which J.D. Vance and then Trump, the White House, later denied. So there's no question that while the United States and Israel are broadly aligned in terms of their goals in the region, there are big pieces where that's not the case. And specifically with a ceasefire in Lebanon, there's no question in my mind that this is not what the United States wants to see. They don't want to see the Israelis continuing with these strikes. They don't want to see them undermining the Americans right now. That is precisely what's happened. Bibi would love to see this ceasefire fall apart. He wants the Iranians to make the next move. And then he wants the United States to say, well, we tried, but we're still in it. Because from Israel's perspective, there's still a lot that they would like to accomplish in Iran that has not yet been taken care of. By the way, this isn't just Israel. The United Arab Emirates, it looks like they were engaged with strikes on Iran entering the war in the last day. The UAE certainly has not denied it. The Iranians have made announcements around it. There was a big explosion inside Iran, an oil facility, and the Iranians struck back. They're another country, unlike the Saudis, unlike the Qataris. The UAE and Israel both are uncomfortable being left in a position where Iran, the regime is in place, they're strong, they have control over the Straits. So there are a lot of players that are involved in this right now that aren't necessarily aligned with the announcement that Trump made.
Let's talk about the Straits that you just mentioned, Ian, which is this morning, despite what the White House is saying, that Iran is still controlling which ships go through. A limited number of ships are being allowed to pass. But with this toll, something they've discovered here that they can charge, say, $1 a barrel. If you figure most of those ships carry 2 or 3 million barrels, you can do the math on that. That's a lot of money over the course of a year. American oil executives reportedly have been calling the White House saying, hey, we can't have this. It would destroy our business. And, of course, the Gulf states saying the same thing. It would destroy our flow of oil through there. So with this new massive leverage point where Iran says we can disrupt the global economy by controlling the Strait of Hormuz, what would the negotiation be with the United States? I mean, Donald Trump suggested to ABC yesterday that, well, we'll do some kind of revenue sharing with Iran. We'll get a cut of those ships, too. Does that make sense to you? What is an acceptable deal to the United States here?
There's no mechanism to make that happen. We're very far from that. There are countries that are prepared to pay it. The Indians, the Pakistanis, they had been negotiating. Some of those ships are going through because they're paying the money. So obviously it makes economic sense for them in an inflated price environment with the Strait disrupted. The French actually have paid money to the Iranians to allow at least one ship through, core ally of the United States. At least they have been before the war. Now, if there is no military plan, doesn't exist to stop, to displace the Iranians from this position. And if you wanted a more negative take on the ceasefire, you would say the United States continues to be bringing this third aircraft strike group into the region, the USS Bush. It won't be there until April 15, 16. There are 1,000 more troops going in. CENTCOM has advised the White House that right now, with Iranian ballistic missile capabilities and other capabilities, that they aren't yet ready to engage in any ground force attacks in the region. So you could easily say Trump is waiting a couple of weeks to allow for those capacities to develop. He doesn't yet have troops in place that he would be able to try to open the strait if he wanted to. And so that those 2 weeks may just be, I'm buying some time and trying to get oil prices down, markets to rally. I don't think that's what's driving him, but that's a reasonable read on the problem of the strait right now.
The Wall Street Journal editorial board has been consistently critical of the Trump administration over the course of this war, out with a new piece titled, Trump Declares Premature Victory in Iran. The editorial board writes this. Mr. Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance said the ceasefire is conditioned on Iran striking a deal, but it sure sounds like the president just wants the war over. Will Mr. Trump really start bombing again if Iran draws out talks? Given the risk to oil prices, count us skeptical. If the regime behaves as it always has, it will claim to want to reach a deal but never will. The talks will stretch through 2 weeks, then 3, then months. Iran will bet that Mr. Trump won't resume bombing as the midterm elections approach. The rest of the world and Republicans in Congress will lean on Mr. Trump not to resume the fight. The unfortunate truth is that Mr. Trump put himself in this position. His inconsistent rhetoric on the war, claims of victory amid threats of unleashing hell and an end to Iran's civilization, raised global fears and undermined support at home and abroad. The next test for Mr. Trump will be whether he takes his 2-week ceasefire deadline seriously. If he does, and Iran plays its usual games, then he really will have to finish the job. And Chris Matthews, there have been arbitrary deadlines throughout the course of President Trump's presidency. It's always 2 weeks or 4 to 6 weeks or whatever it's going to end up being. But what do you expect to happen at the end of this ceasefire?
Well, I don't think it'll hold. I don't think Israel took it seriously. I don't think it took the whole thing seriously, the whole deal seriously. They continue their battle in Lebanon. And I'm not sure that we're being honest about this, that the press secretary of the president's being honest, that the White House is being honest about whether Lebanon and Israel's attacks on Lebanon weren't part of this deal. I think they're covering for Bibi again. And by the way, I'm still overwhelmed by the New York Times coverage. Not I think the Journal's been great, but the New York Times yesterday's spread the 3-page spread about how this whole started. And the role played by the vice president opposing the whole thing, the role played by the Secretary of State not buying the whole argument of regime change. And then Trump said he didn't think the Strait of Hormuz mattered because there'd be a regime change in the meantime, and therefore we won't have to deal with that regime. This is crazy. It's all conditional. It's not based on fact. The president, he went down hook, line, and sinker, just like the French and the British did back in '56 with Israel. They went along with the Suez campaign against NATO. They did it on their own. And Eisenhower, thank God we had a president like Eisenhower. He just blew the whistle on that and said, no more war. It's over. You guys didn't operate through NATO, and now you're not going to get us backing you now. And just like NATO is saying today, we're not going to back you. We didn't start this stupid war. You did. You did it on your own, Mr. Big Shot. And now you're Mr. Big Shot along with your new best friend, Bibi Netanyahu. I don't trust Netanyahu in this thing one bit. I think he wants to keep this war on as long as he wants to stay out of jail, and that's a long time. And I really have a real problem with Bibi Netanyahu in this, and Trump, who is saying terrible things about civilizations being destroyed and war crimes, basically laying it out beforehand. I'm going to commit a war crime.
Okay, Chris, where does this leave Democrats? It's a question I keep getting asked. Where are the voices of the Democrats? Where is the person around whom Democrats can rally? We keep seeing them. They did it this week again. Wisconsin, Georgia, keep seeing them do well in local state elections. But there doesn't seem to be any sense of unity of voice or purpose or figurehead. Maybe that's just not possible. Maybe that's not possible until the primaries.
Did you get up last Sunday morning 2 weeks ago? Chris Christie, who's the best critic of this whole operation, he said the Democrats are going to win big in November if they stay out of sight. He said if they go to Turks and Caicos, that's the smart move, the Democrats. Don't describe your policies. Don't say what you're going to do about the border because you're not going to do anything about it. And you blew it for 4 years under Biden. So just take it, enjoy the pattern of voting has been 20 to 30 points, way ahead of the spread. The Democrats have been beating the spread. They did it again the other day. They did it in Wisconsin and Georgia. I mean, it's unbelievable they're winning. They're winning in places they should never win in because nobody's thinking about the Democrats. They're thinking about how they're mad at Trump and his party. And so they just benefit from the pattern. The pattern voting is so clearly in their direction that Ken Martin, the chairman of the Democratic Party, has refused to release the autopsy on 24 and why they lost. Tell me what it's about. The Hispanics won't like it because it might say, we lost it over the border issue. The Jewish people may say we don't like it because younger voters are not supporting Israel anymore. There's all kinds of reasons they want to keep it secret, but it's only your secret, Democrats, because everybody else knows why you're hiding it.
Ian, is it fair to assess what's happened thus far in Iran as a military success for the United States, such a success that it would give any nation in the world pause before they thought about fooling around with the American military? And yet, on the other hand, a disastrous strategic failure?
Largely, yes. I mean, a couple of sort of hesitations there. First, the Iranians have much more missile capability than the Americans had assumed. They've got longer range missiles. They also have hypersonics that have been able to avoid American defenses. That's how you hit that base in Riyadh. That's how you hit the LNG facility in Qatar. Even after the Iranians said they were going to do the latter, hardened facility. So that's a bit of a problem. The Iranians have also been able to dig out their ballistic missile stockpiles after they've been hit, dig out some of the launch pads in less than 24 hours. So that resilience for a comparatively, sort of small military is a bit problematic. But sure, if you're China and you've never fought a naval war and, you've got all sorts of corruption internally, you're not looking at what the Americans are doing militarily in Iran and Venezuela and say, I can't wait to do Taiwan right now. No, absolutely not. But what you do see is that America's political capacity to tolerate pain, both from the trade war with the Chinese and their response with critical minerals, and now their capacity to tolerate the straits being shut down from a comparatively small Iran is really limited. The Americans have an incredible military and a glass jaw. And you don't want American adversaries or even allies feeling that way about this country, that the Americans can't take a punch, that's a very, very difficult conclusion that I think many people will draw from how President Trump has handled this war and how he's handled his power in the last year.